Moving on to measurable objectives. So, a lot of the NOFO is and the act is pretty. It's mostly clear, and you just kind of translate it a little bit. This is the exception. The measurable objective section is really unclear. The act is it's pretty convoluted the way Congress worded this. So we spent a lot of time internally trying to parse this out, figure out what it meant, and in order to provide you all some guidance. So just a reminder, Congress would like you to create measurable objectives for promoting and advancing, and then they give you 5 categories. We have broken them out to 6 because, again, availability of fixed and wireless broadband technology is quite different than affordability, right? And so we have done that. And remember, you're going to want to leave space for other, right? However, you're going to want to create measurable objectives for these 5 categories for each of the 8 covered populations and the general population in general. So what is a measurable objective? That's the big, elephant in the room. So we define it we found a definition of a measurable objective that we think works for this context, and it's they're concrete outcomes based on defined metrics, and they're designed to achieve your goals of your digital equity plan by addressing your digital equity barriers. Okay, so concrete outcomes based on defined metrics, designed to achieve the goals of your digital equity plan by addressing digital equity barriers. You remember your vision, that should be transformative, it should be visionary, it should be pie in the sky almost. Achievable, but pie in the sky. Your measurable objectives need to be measurable. They need to be achievable. So you're breaking down your vision down into smaller objectives, bite-sized chunks almost, right, that you can achieve over time. Okay? Please do. And
I should know by now. So an outcome needs a definition because some people or organizations may look at an outcome as, oh, we built a well and that water is now in the well and we can access it. But the outcome is actually the benefit of people being able to access the water. Or I take a vaccine and it lowers the blood, the parasite in my blood, right? So when we talk about outcomes, I think that's more important than okay, it's not more important. It's as important as defining the objective.
Yeah, you're right.
And so we might need to actually say, what is an outcome? What do we mean by outcome? Mm-hmm. Because more than counting, right? It's not an input, it's not an output.
Right, yeah. We can't confuse outcome and output.
Yeah.
They are 2 different things.
Very different, yeah.
Yeah.
If we're talking about outcome or impact, and we're looking at population measures, it gets really fuzzy because how much of that is, we might be able to find correlations, but how much of that can we directly connect our work to?
Yes, and so we will continue to stress this, but we believe your measurable objectives, we NDIA, I don't want to speak on behalf of NTIA, but we NDIA believe that your measurable objectives should be tied to the categories that Congress gives you, because you need to measure progress on those things. If you start having to measure progress on how many school kids have straight A's versus C's because they're connected, you're going to very quickly get down one, data collection nightmare, 2, not really being able to parse what you impacted versus what other people did, right? So we're going to talk more about that, but I do think you have to take this. You're going to have to continue to scope your plan and what you all have control over to what's defined for you by Congress, because otherwise you won't be able to show progress because there are so many things outside your control.
Amy, if I may, some of the other conversations that around this that I found is interesting is just the idea of measuring digital equity as the objective, right? Like digital equity is the goal, and then the work we're doing measuring that's already, a measure that's important enough on
Yeah.
its own. And sometimes we think like, oh, digital equity is great, but what's gonna do for housing? What's gonna do for economic development? And we get stuck on that, the same thing. So like making sure that we advocate for digital equity as a thing that it's worth being a goal and a measure objective on
Yeah.
its own.
Yeah, and I think because you're all wonderful public servants that want to do the most good. I had someone at one of these workshops say, "But I want to solve homelessness," and I was like, "Me too." But you're not going to do that with less than however much money you get in your state to do the digital equity work. It's just not going to happen. So let's do what we can do, right? Let's talk about solving the digital divide for the homeless population in your state, which then means that can have these wonderful outcomes but it may not. But what it may do is you can measure how many homeless people have access to the internet that didn't have it before. That's a valuable thing to measure, and that has value in and of itself. I think Tor, you had a point or a question or.
Yeah, and I put this in the parking lot, so I don't know if but I think it connects, and it's really tough, but I'm going to say it because I think it's really crucial. We do need to keep in mind what the long term looks like, because we're talking about big short term money right now.
Mm-hmm.
And the questions of trust came up, where if we're getting people into a digital world where they're relying on digital resources, and then the funding runs out. So I think we need to be looking at talking about now and building this in somehow into our plans, looking at broadband as a utility and municipal internet. And obviously that's huge, but I think we need to be angling for that as a next piece, because otherwise potentially we're actually setting people up.
Yeah, and I think that how well that will, or whether or not you'll even be able to go that route within your plan is going to vary state by state and territory by territory. In some places, that's a non-starter, unfortunately. But if that is something that you in New York can build into your plan, I think you should.
Can I just be obnoxious for one? Not more than I have been, probably. But I think that it's important though not to split. It's important to split hairs on this, because an output is not the impact. The impact happens after you have your outcome. And if we focus on, say, counting how many people who are on the street or living in destitute type situations have access, that's not the impact at all. That really is going to get you the additionality in the money that Thor's talking about, which is when this money runs out. So why am I going to give money to you if you just give people access to internet? It doesn't do anything really. What's going to do something is for them to use that makes their lives more productive and sustainable. So I don't want to be obnoxious about it, but I do think there's a difference between counting and the impact. And
Yeah, I think I partially agree, I partially disagree, but that's just me personally. But I think let's continue working through this, and I think we're gonna. I think we'll all understand it a bit better. But no, I agree. We don't want connectivity for connectivity's sake, right? We want people to be thriving. That's our goal. But in terms of the plan and how you measure it, these objectives, they have to be measurable, they have to be achievable. And I do think actually connectivity for connectivity's sake, getting someone connected is a worthwhile goal, because what they then do with it, it's up to them. The opportunities are endless. And so I think reframing this conversation that just getting someone connected isn't enough. That's actually, it might be enough. That is a good thing. Okay.
But if it shuts off next week because there's not money sustaining that, then you just invested money in infrastructure that's not useful. And I think that's the point I'm trying to make, is that you need to have measurability on the long term so you can access additional financing, impact bonds, blah, 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 all those other things. So it is enough to connect, but it's more important to sustain.
Yeah.
And I think we're not arguing differently here. I'm
Yeah,
just trying to make
you're
the
at
point
it.
that, that if we talk about outcomes, we have to think about what it means. And that's, it is splitting hairs, but it's important.
No, I think you're right. Okay, so as you identify your barriers and you develop your measurable objectives, this is going to be a parallel and iterative process. And what I mean by that is that when we actually were first thinking of this, I was like, oh, it'll be very linear. So I'll go and I'll find what is preventing for all the covered populations in my state from getting online. And then I will know exactly what objectives we need to meet, and then we'll create an implementation to meet those objectives. And as we continue to think about this, we thought, actually, no, it really is more of a cyclical and iterative process, because what you're going to find is, so say, for example, you go talk to, again, folks where English is their second language, and they say they have difficulty in navigating a public service website, right? So then that aligns with the online accessibility and inclusivity of public resources and services, that measurable objective category. And then what you then learn, though, is after doing a little bit more digging, is for that same participant or that same population, you learn that actually not only is it hard to navigate a public website because it's in English, it's also that they don't really trust it because they're worried about providing their information to the government. So it's two barriers that you've now identified, right? And so then it aligns to two different measurable objective categories. So then what you design to solve this issue is going to change, right? So originally you might have said, okay, well, we'll just make sure all of our websites, our public websites at the state level, are in English and Spanish. That might have been the solution you came up with, right? But now you're going to figure out, okay, well, actually, we need to both do that, because that's a good thing. You should do that. But then we also need to make sure that all of our undocumented and new Americans and folks where English is their second language feel comfortable accessing these websites online. And so we need to make sure any sort of digital skills training we offer incorporates this how to use these websites safely, why it's safe, and we also need to make our own websites safe and secure, okay? Does that make sense? And it's because you went back and probed a bit deeper that you're able to come out with a more nuanced and particular measurable objective that actually gets at all the different barriers that you wouldn't have identified if you hadn't probed a level deeper. Okay? All right, so there's lots of folks around you that can help, that can help you identify different implementation strategies, support meaningful measurement, or to figure out ways to sufficiently meet the needs of your covered populations. And we've talked ad nauseum about who all these partners are and stakeholders, but just know that they can also help with this part as well. So once you have developed your measurable objectives, you're going to want to think about what's the appropriate size for them and scale, because some of them are going to be particular to a specific covered population in a particular place, and some of them are going to impact everyone across your entire state, okay? And so you're going to want to think about that as you're going through this process. So you want to match your objectives to a size and scale that match the barrier. And then you want to make sure that you're not too narrow and not too broad. And then also that you're considering the geography, the specific covered population, and then those other measurable objective categories that can help determine the appropriate scale. So again, geography. So the geography, does the objective cover the entire state or specific areas? Or individual jurisdictions or specific locations. Population, will the objective address the needs of one of the population at large, or will it be specific to one specific covered population? And then is it specific to one measurable objective category, or does it span multiple? Excuse me. So for example, say you find throughout your identifying barriers process that affordability is a challenge for every covered population, right? But maybe your state or territory's enrollment in the Affordable Connectivity Program is really low. So strategies, your measurable objective category strategies would then be to increase ACP enrollment across the entire state, right? So that would be a measurable objective that would hit all the covered populations in the general population, right? Whereas if you found that it's really just the veterans population in your state that has a low ACP enrollment, whereas the rest of your covered populations have a high ACP enrollment, you'd want a targeted measurable objective about raising ACP enrollment for the veteran population alone. Okay? You see how understanding the data and the needs of everyone helps you scale the measurable objectives? Okay. All right. So, so some tips for defining your objectives and assessing impact. First, you're going to look at both progress on individual objectives versus macro. So some are going to be progress towards smaller things versus things that have statewide outcomes. You want to craft with specific metrics in mind. How will you know you're making progress, right? Again, this goes back to the data that you've collected. You need to know what you have so you know where to go. So you need to craft, you need to know, again, the key word here is measurable. So you need to be able to tell whether or not you're making progress. So you have to have, okay, we're going to try and have 70% of veterans enroll in the ACP program. Right now we have 50. And then again, leverage the expertise of partners, those that are helping support your planning process. Okay, we have another activity, 8.1. And this one, so I would like you to look through the whole worksheet. It is a bit lengthy. You all have already identified some measure or some barriers here for covered populations. But look through this because it can help support creating some of the measurable objectives. But then what I'd like you to spend the bulk of your time doing is on the last page, table, the question 5. We have another matrix, surprise, where we'd like you to list out, a mock or a real barrier that you identified earlier, and then tie it to the measurable objective category it goes with, if there is one. And then mock up a measurable objective. What would that be? What would your goal be for that specific barrier, for that population? And then figure out, okay, then what metrics do we need to have? How would we measure progress in this? And you can do this for a couple different, if you'd like, list out a few. And take we'll do about 15 minutes on this activity. So how was that for folks? Was that a helpful exercise, or was it overwhelming?
Like 40 more hours. That was good.
5 years.
Actually, that has been some of the feedback that we've gotten is that you guys need more team time. To which I say, I wish I could provide it for you, but no, yeah. Can y'all talk a little bit about what you talked about at your table, main folks? Oh, Maine? Yes.
We talked more about sort of the preconditions that we need to do this. Sorry, thank you. We actually got a little sidetracked and talked more about the conditions and the understanding we need to do this work, because there are already some programs out there, and without knowing and understanding what already exists and what's working and not working in the groups that are already working with, we talked about incarcerated individuals as a covered population. There's already a program in some prisons, but is it in all prisons? There's a sort of a needs assessment stage that sort of has to happen before we design the right questions for a research partner. So we got sort of stuck on that, which is why Andrew's comment about we need 40 or more hours, because we really sort of need to do that for each of the covered populations before we can really dig in and understand those barriers and ask the right questions and develop the objectives.
Yeah, so this activity feels a little bit advanced, but actually what it did for you all is it told you don't know what you don't know, but it also told you some of the things you don't know, right? So that you need to go back and figure out what data you need to collect in order to get to the point where you can even identify barriers or create measurable objectives. Yeah. When we were in our first workshop, North Carolina had a similar experience. They said, well, we can't even create a objective or identify barriers for incarcerated individuals because we don't even know, are there access to computers in the prisons throughout the state? And I said, well, that's part of, then you'll need to go find that out, right? That's going to be part of your data collection process. Yeah. Anyone else? Did anyone like actually write anything down and create anything?
So I'm not going to answer your question directly, but just to share kind of what we talked about over here. We actually talked more about process than anything else.
Okay.
And what
I see
you're
some
what the
drawing.
end. Sorry.
I see some drawing back there.
Yeah.
I'm gonna walk you through that.
Yeah. So the this was like a helpful kind of like guidepost to like kind of start conversation. But what it got me thinking about was another sort of long-term planning exercises that we've done is using a driver diagram process tool to just like nail down, not only what your objective is, but also like conditions that would need to exist to make your objective true. And that for me in other sort of planning exercises has been a super useful tool to not only articulate like the right objective, but also to like create strategy that goes around the objective. So driver diagrams are used a lot in different settings in the healthcare. Apparently the librarian world uses it, which is awesome. And you can combine it with like other types of planning, scenario planning, et cetera. But you basically come up with your objective. You have two sets of drivers, a key driver, which is the things that are like immediately relevant to any given objective, and a secondary driver, which is all the things that would need to exist or be true in order for your key driver to exist or be true. And then if you walk through that process, you should end up with like a pretty reasonable assessment of like a strategy. And then you can look at your strategy and go back to your objective and think about if that objective still makes any sense, which is sometimes an interesting exercise in itself.
Okay. Please do. I'm loving this. Is
So
great. I was
part of
about to
that-
have you give us an example.
So we use that also in Libraries Future Strategic. It's foresight. So it's using that actually, we call it backcasting. So you look at your objective and then you work your way back, how to get there. And one of the key things that we use is we're talking a lot about what's happening within our organizations, within our states, but we also have to think about the outside impact drivers, the macro and the meta levels, social, technological, environmental, economic, and political drivers that are touching base on all these things. And that helps you really drill down and nail down to it's kind of stress testing your objective before you get there, so you're not wasting time, but also thinking about Josh also uses scenarios, so we do a lot of different scenarios for different the perfect example is I tell people if you have a strategic plan that was beginning March 2020, it's out the window. But if you had a scenarios plan that had different scenarios for a pandemic, global climate change, global war, you're able to do that. And this is it sounds very convoluted and complicated, but when you're looking at your objectives, they could go down the drain in 3 months if something happens. So really, really building those out and really stress testing them.
Yeah, I think one, just that you'll have to keep in mind as you go through that is to remember to, like, once you get to the objectives, you can only control what you control. Even if you can only control what you can control. I mean, even if there are all these other political, socioeconomical factors. Yeah, that's great. Thank you. I can tell Josh is a planner. Yeah, and I think, actually Aaron on our team, who's not here, it was really key in helping us figure out this measurable objectives strategy, and he's a planner as well. So another plug for adding planners and librarians to your team. Anyone else? Yeah, Tor?
We ended up, I think, maybe starting with one covered population, and then it sort of ballooned in a way that actually felt like it sort of went out and then came back in. So we came up with a broad objective of that every residential facility for covered populations has connectivity devices and navigators. So focusing specifically on residential.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's still pretty huge, but it also felt kind of like easy to describe and to measure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And yeah, because you could measure that. You could figure that out. How many have access to an access? How many have access to, you said devices, right? And then how many have access to whatever digital navigation services are present in the state? Yeah.
Right, and then building on that, you can do that with obviously community-based senior centers, day programs for adults with developmental disabilities. And in the ideal world, our governor would require the Office of Management and Budget to increase every contract for a covered population to ensure that digital devices, internet service, and a digital navigator or somebody's role also includes digital navigation. But that's the ideal world.
Yeah. Yeah. I love how your objectives are already, you're already thinking about the implementation, how you would implement and obtain your objectives. Yeah. Camilla, it seems like you were about to say something.
But I think all our barriers are kind of entangled, are the same. We are also having the situation for access. Depending on whether people are living in the middle of the island, that we don't have the same access as the coast. Digital skills, affordability, but we also, as the main group, we need to look into and assess the incarcerated to see where is the personal development in there, is what's happening, and to what extent are they being taught what to do for the inmates that are ready to go out. So we need to do some assessment there to see how we can overcome those barriers.
Yeah. Yeah. This activity, it is probably something further down the road, but I do find it useful to do now because it tells you, what you need to start figuring out about each covered population. Okay. All right, moving on. So connecting your measurable objectives with state goals. So just a reminder that this is part of the act, right? That you're required, once you've spent all this time developing these measurable objectives, and you've spent time perfecting them, you do need to connect them to existing goals that are your states and territory already have. For instance, I know many of you probably have a state economic development plan or a state workforce plan, or you already have, educational attainment goals. What you'll do is, and this is something I would encourage you to do perhaps later in the process, not at the tail end, but later. Develop your measurable objectives, look at these other goals that your state has already established, and then figure out how achieving your objectives that you've laid out will impact those other goals that your state has. So I think it was Rhode Island was talking about how you all have a lot of goals around entrepreneurship, increasing startups, attracting entrepreneurs to your state to work out of Rhode Island. So what you do is you'd say, okay, so instance you had a measurable objective that was increasing affordable access in a specific community, then you could then go and look at that increasing startup goal and say, well, if we increase affordable access in this community and make Wi-Fi available and affordable for X percentage of the population, then that could impact increasing entrepreneurship in our state, right? You can tie those things. But I would encourage you to develop your measurable objectives first, then see how they impact the other state goals. Don't do it the other way around. Or again, we're going to get back to that cart before the horse thing, and it'll spin out of control pretty quickly, and you'll be measuring things you have no control over. Okay? So yeah, basically just look for alignment between the two. Here are some areas you can find the different objectives. I will say for, one of the measurable objective categories is the cybersecurity one. Your state IT departments likely already have a lot of work that they're doing around cybersecurity. I would talk to them and figure out what they're doing and how what they're already doing can align with impact. You can help grow it through what you're doing. Okay. Okay. Local plans. The other part of the NOFO is asking you to look at how you will incorporate local digital equity plans into your plan. I think that how is a really important word, because you may find that you're not able to incorporate fully word for word plans that folks around in your community have already created. So first of all, are any of you aware of do any of your states or territory have local digital inclusion plans in them already? Municipality, it could be municipalities, it could be counties, it could be regions, it could be parishes. Yes, I see some nods.
Really terrible question. What if we are pretty sure that there are none? There are like components of plans that include digital inclusion, but there's not like an explicit digital inclusion plan.
So I think that's actually going to be the case for many across the country. So there's actually not a whole lot of explicitly digital inclusion plans. Like I'm thinking maybe most 150.
Yeah, so it's not going to be like when we go to NTI and we go, but there isn't, and they're like, you didn't do your homework, and it's a catch-22.
I mean, that is a question for your FPO, but but I mean, you can't manufacture something that's not there, and it is explicit in the act that it is state digital equity plans, or a description of how municipal, regional, and/or tribal digital equity plans. It doesn't say another plan that contains some digital equity in it, but it's a word.
Right.
You know.
So, like, we could pull out paragraphs and be like, this type, but then we're like, that's a whole different.
I think that's a different exercise.
Right.
For instance, I know there's a lot of community broadband plans that are out there, but they don't address the digital equity side at all. They could be useful for you, but I don't know that, they could be useful, but they may not be. Okay. Again, you should talk to your FPO though. I'm not the one giving you the money. Yes, Josh.
Well, I was gonna say, so we have a bunch of these now.
Yes.
So we have at least 6 or 7 municipal or regional digital equity plans that I'm aware of. We have 6 or 7 municipal or regional digital equity plans, and we are very easily connected with the authors and leaders of those plans. I guess my question was like how should we suck them up into the state one, and we're going to be, as I said yesterday, issuing a grant to municipalities to do more of these intentionally to get more local planning done while we're concurrently doing the state plan.
Yep.
And
I'm glad you asked.
And I think my pitch to the communities to do that is like, do your plan now so that your recommendations are included in our state plan. Put yourself in a better position to access funding in the future. But yeah, now I'd be curious to get your all's thoughts on like, okay, what does that look like in like practice?
Yeah. So I think in practice, it's gonna look pretty different depending on. It's gonna vary significantly across the country. We're going to go through an activity in a minute. It basically, essentially what we would recommend is doing a literature review of the plans that exist in your community or in your state or territory. Because, who was saying something created before 2020 isn't useful? Is that you, Dawn? Yeah. Anything created before 2020 probably can't use. Is how it's over. That's a reality right now, right? So some of the plans that were created around digital equity in your local communities were created before 2020. And so what's in those plans, you probably do want to still review them because the people who wrote them, the communities, they're probably still active and can provide a lot of feedback to you in your planning process, but maybe the recommendations in there are not useful for your plan. Probably the data they collected is not useful for you in your plan. But if it was created post 2020 or during 2020. It very well may be. So that's where you're gonna want to start to figure it out. And actually, yeah, we're just gonna go ahead and move into thinking through that as at your table. So we have worksheet 8.2. So essentially what we're telling you to do is to look for those areas of alignment. So the other thing is not every plan will address all the things you have to address in your plan. So because none of these local plans were created with this statute in mind, right? They didn't have Congress telling them they had to include measurable objectives. So they didn't necessarily do that. So it's not a 1-for-1 here. You're gonna have to look through the plans, figure out where things align and whether that information is timely and useful for you. And then that's how you'll figure out how to pull it over. And so I do recommend you go through this process, the full worksheet process for the plans. This is, again, where having a university partner could be helpful. They're used to conducting literature reviews, or an intern or a fellow, right? This would be a really good activity for them. But what I'd like you to do now for our last, for about the next 8 minutes until 2:30 is you did get an email yesterday with links to 3 different plans. I'd like, if you don't have one in your state or territory that you're aware of, click on one of these plans and look through it together at your table and fill out the table on the last page, question 10. But if you already have, like Josh, if you're aware of, pull up one that's in Massachusetts, look through it, see how it aligns with the table 10, and then that's how you'll know how to pull it into your state plan. Okay, so we'll do this until 2:30. And then just a reminder also, back to community engagement, knowing the authors of these plans, knowing who wrote them is another community engagement tool.